Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Such gestures, seemingly mundane, are in fact acts of synchronization, moments in which consciousnesses align across distance, mirroring the very subject of tonight's inquiry. The Silver Key, that most elusive artifact in the literature of the forbidden. Within the strange and mournful mythos of H.P. Lovecraft, this small object does not merely open doors between worlds. It opens a far more dangerous passage between the waking mind and its own irretrievable origins. It is not a talisman of power, nor a simple metaphor of nostalgia. It is a threshold mechanism, a philosophical trap disguised as hope. Historically, the Silver Key emerged in 1926, a year when Lovecraft's material circumstances were collapsing, but his metaphysical ambition was expanding. The story appeared at the intersection of modern disillusionment and ancient mysticism, when science had stripped the cosmos of divinity, and yet the yearning for transcendence persisted. Randolph Carter's quest to reclaim lost dreams becomes, in this context, an intellectual allegory for a civilization that remembers wonder but cannot believe in it. The key's shine reflects not illumination, but recursion, the self attempting to re-enter the chamber of its own forgotten divinity. We must recognize that to even discuss this object is to risk participation in its logic, for the key exists as symbol, as story, and as psychological contagion. Our investigation, therefore, will proceed through four interlocking lenses: its origins and influences, its nature and themes, its literary manifestations, and its cultural afterlife. What follows is not a search for truth, but an autopsy of revelation, performed with trembling hands upon the open door of the human mind. When the Silver Key first appeared in 1926, H.P. Lovecraft stood at the uneasy threshold between personal despair and philosophical revelation. The America that surrounded him, mechanized, urbanized, and spiritually unmoored, had emerged from the First World War into a new kind of nihilism. According to his correspondence, Lovecraft felt this loss of meaning not as an abstract cultural malaise, but as an intimate psychic collapse. The boy who once dreamed of ancient worlds and celestial architectures had grown into a man exiled from his own imagination. The Silver Key was not conceived as a mere continuation of the dream cycle, but as its eulogy, an act of literary mourning for the capacity to believe in wonder. It is not a story of adventure nor of discovery. It is rather the account of a man who has seen too much of reality to remain sane and too much of infinity to remain human. We must recognize that Lovecraft's intent here was neither nostalgic nor escapist. It was diagnostic, exposing a sickness of modern consciousness that mistook disenchantment for wisdom. To understand the story's genesis, one must situate it within Lovecraft's broader intellectual evolution between 1923 and 1927. A period when his fiction shifted from material cosmicism to metaphysical introspection. During these years, Lovecraft's letters reveal increasing preoccupation with the nature of perception and memory, which he called the only true ghosts of time. The industrial modernity of the 1920s, with its fluorescent lights and expanding cities, mirrored for him a metaphysical blindness, the replacement of cosmic awe with utilitarian knowledge. Randolph Carter, his recurring alter ego, embodies the tragic philosopher who remembers the dream of eternity, yet cannot re-enter it. The Silver Key becomes, therefore, not an artifact of power, but a cipher for the soul's regression toward lost totality. It is not the door to another world. It is the mirror reflecting how that other world has already been forgotten. Historically, this transformation reflects broader literary currents. The post-war years witnessed a collective exhaustion with realism and a turn toward interiority and myth. In the same decade, T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, 1922, and Joyce's Ulysses, 1922, attempted, through fragmentation and mythic scaffolding, to reconstruct meaning amid cultural collapse. Lovecraft's response, though working within pulp forms, was equally modernist in essence. He reimagined the Gothic not as an architecture of external dread, but as a topology of cognition itself. The Silver Key thus belongs to that peculiar genre of metaphysical autobiography, disguised as weird fiction, standing beside Kafka's The Castle and Dunsany's The King of Elfland's Daughter, as meditations on the limits of perception. Consider this carefully. Carter's dilemma is not that the universe is hostile, but that its infinite scope renders the self a trivial hallucination. The key, then, does not open, it erases. In this light, Lovecraft's creative intent emerges as both reactionary and prophetic. He lamented the loss of romantic imagination, yet he articulated the 20th century's growing sense that imagination itself is a liability. His personal writings from this period describe the disease of consciousness, a condition in which one perceives too much of reality's indifference to endure its weight. The Silver Key functions as a narrative experiment in confronting this disease, transforming philosophical despair into aesthetic form. When Carter uses the key, he seeks to return to childhood's dream, but the act exposes a paradox. The moment of transcendence coincides with annihilation. It is not salvation, it is self-erasure disguised as revelation. In Lovecraft's creative theology, every gate to truth leads back to the graveyard of perception. We must pause here to note that Lovecraft's technique achieves its power through restraint. Unlike his earlier tales of monstrous revelation, the Silver Key contains no explicit terror. Its horror is philosophical, unfolding in syntax, or on suggestion. The narrative reads as a confession composed in the language of ethnography, detached, documented, almost ritualistic in its repetition of key, door, and gate. This deliberate monotony enacts the paralysis of a mind trapped between worlds. The reader, lulled by scholarly diction, becomes participant in Carter's doomed inquiry. It is not the spectacle of horror that disturbs, but its absence, the emptiness where meaning should reside. In this subtle inversion lies Lovecraft's modernism. The unseen is not hidden by shadow, but by comprehension itself. From a psychological standpoint, the Silver Key also marks Lovecraft's reconciliation with failure, the failure of reason to console and of memory to restore. Written shortly after his divorce and return to Providence, the story reflects a man turning inward, crafting metaphysics out of autobiography. Randolph Carter's alienation mirrors Lovecraft's own retreat from modern life. Both seek transcendence through intellect, and both are destroyed by it. The date 1926 becomes more than historical. It becomes symbolic of the interwar tension between rational progress and existential despair. Through this lens, Lovecraft ceases to be mere fantasist and becomes historian of consciousness, documenting the slow extinction of metaphysical certainty. It is not insanity he describes, but the logical consequence of too much knowledge. The story's placement within the dream cycle further clarifies this trajectory. Earlier tales such as The White Ship, 1919, and The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, 1927, offered portals to wonder, though already tinged with melancholy. In The Silver Key, the portal collapses inward. The dreamlands are no longer external geographies, but recursive structures of thought. Carter's attempt to reclaim them resembles the alchemist's fatal experiment, the desire to dissolve the boundaries between mind and cosmos. Lovecraft, by this stage, had internalized his own mythology, the gods, the keys, the thresholds, transforming them from supernatural entities into epistemological metaphors. The Silver Key, then, represents the closing of the circle begun in his youth. The dreamer awakens only to find that waking itself is the dream. Ultimately, Lovecraft's intent in crafting the Silver Key was not to escape reality, but to anatomize its despair. His story functions as a warning disguised as elegy, a reflection on the tragic human impulse to pursue comprehension beyond endurance. The key unlocks not heaven, not hell, but the realization that both are constructs of the perceiving mind. In this, Lovecraft stands beside philosophers such as Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, translating their metaphysics into the language of dread. The Silver Key, shimmering between symbol and object, embodies the paradox of knowledge itself, precious, dangerous, and fatally illuminating. As we move to the next section, we must trace the deeper ancestry of this symbol, exploring how ancient philosophies and forgotten mythologies prepared the ground for its emergence. For only by understanding its cultural and philosophical antecedents can we begin to grasp why this key was ever forged at all. To understand the symbolic potency of the Silver Key, one must look beyond Lovecraft's personal biography, and into the deeper reservoirs of cultural myth, philosophical metaphysics, and mystical tradition that informed his vision. Though Lovecraft famously denied belief in the supernatural, he nevertheless tapped into a body of inherited symbolism that reaches back through centuries of esoteric thought. The key is not merely a plot device. It is an archetypal instrument, a threshold object that has appeared across religious, philosophical, and psychological systems as both portal and paradox. It is not simply a means of passage, but a trial of worth, a test of cognition, a symbol of the forbidden. And this symbolic lineage stretches far beyond 1926 Providence. The key reflects an ancient anxiety. That reality has layers, and that some doors, once opened, cannot be shut without consequence. In classical philosophy, one finds a compelling antecedent in Plato's allegory of the cave, in which the prisoner's release represents the painful transition from illusion to truth. But where Plato envisions the ascent as ennobling, Lovecraft casts it as annihilating. The silver key becomes a reversal of the Platonic ideal. What is unlocked is not enlightenment, but entropy. Similarly, the Gnostic tradition, particularly the Valentinian strain, offers a poignant parallel. According to Gnostic cosmology, the material world is a flawed emanation of higher, hidden realms, crafted not by a benevolent god, but by a blind demiurge. Salvation lies in recovering lost gnosis, a secret knowledge that exposes the world's illusory nature. This knowledge is not acquired through study, but through awakening. In this model, the key is a forbidden tool of escape, an esoteric password, a divine spark, a remembrance of origins too terrible or sublime to bear. We must recognize that Lovecraft, consciously or not, inherited this metaphysical architecture, though he emptied it of hope. Another significant influence is the romantic longing for a lost golden age, a motif echoed in Carter's desire to return to the dreaming innocence of childhood. The Romantic poets, particularly Wordsworth, speak of a fading vision, a spiritual connection to the cosmos that diminishes with age. In Intimations of Immortality, Wordsworth laments that our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting, suggesting that the soul descends into forgetfulness as it incarnates into the world. This is not unlike Carter's existential malaise in The Silver Key, wherein the adult mind loses the capacity for dream and myth. But where Wordsworth ultimately finds consolation in memory and nature, Lovecraft finds only horror in the act of remembering. It is not simply that the dream is gone. It is that the dream was never benign. The past is not a haven. It is an abyss. Here again, we see a reversal. What was once the sacred wellspring of inspiration becomes a cursed reservoir of truths better left unspoken. Religious and mythic traditions have long portrayed keys as liminal instruments, symbols of divine authority, restricted knowledge, or spiritual passage. Consider Hermes Trismegistus, the syncretic god of wisdom in Greco-Egyptian Hermeticism, often depicted with a caduceus and associated with hidden doctrines. In medieval iconography, St. Peter bears the keys to the kingdom of heaven, access contingent on spiritual purity. In Hindu cosmology, Yama, Lord of Death, possesses the keys to rebirth and karmic judgment. Even in Norse mythology, Heimdall guards the Bifrost Bridge, the threshold between mortal and divine realms. These figures are not gatekeepers in the bureaucratic sense. They are metaphysical regulators of transition, thresholds personified. The key in Lovecraft's tale echoes these traditions, but with a crucial distortion. It offers passage, but no return, initiation, but no redemption. Its lineage is ancient, but its function has been inverted. The gate is open, yes, but what steps through is no longer human. In more modern terms, the key can be linked to Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence, in which all things return infinitely, without end or progress. This cyclical view of time undermines the linear, redemptive narratives offered by religion or enlightenment. The Silver Key does not open onto utopia or spiritual transformation. It reveals the terrifying stasis of recurrence. Carter, by unlocking the gate, does not escape time. He becomes entangled in all his possible selves, lost in a multiverse of identity collapse. In this, we glimpse a philosophical horror more profound than the monstrous. Not that the self is meaningless, but that it is manifold and incoherent. We must pause here and consider the implication. If there is no singular self, then every act of transcendence is also an act of dissolution. The seeker does not find truth, he fragments into it. It is also worth exploring the influence of late 19th and early 20th century occultism, particularly the theosophical movement spearheaded by Helena Blavatsky. Theosophy popularized the idea of hidden planes of reality accessible through symbols, rituals, and keys, both literal and metaphorical. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, 1888, speaks of ancient wisdom encoded in symbols, lost civilizations, and the passage between worlds. While Lovecraft rejected theosophy as pseudoscience, its thematic residue saturates his work. The idea that human consciousness is a degraded remnant of higher awareness, that language itself conceals keys to forgotten realms. These are theosophical in structure, if not in intent. Lovecraft stripped away the spiritual optimism, leaving only the architectural scaffolding of the occult. His key does not lead upward to reunion with divinity, it plunges downward into the unspeakable substrate of reality. Lastly, the silver key must be read through the psychological lens of initiation rites and symbolic thresholds. In initiation, whether tribal, religious, or secret society, the initiate must pass through danger, ambiguity, and symbolic death before re-emerging transformed. Anthropologist Victor Turner described this as the liminal phase, a state of betwixt and between, where identity dissolves and reconstitutes. Carter's journey mirrors this structure, but again, Lovecraft deforms it. There is no reconstitution, only endless liminality. The key initiates Carter into a rite without closure, a crossing without a return. In this, it reflects the modern condition, perpetual transition without arrival. The silver key becomes the emblem of postmodern disorientation, an object of access that grants only fragmentation. It is not simply an artifact of narrative, it is a mechanism of metaphysical vertigo. Taken together, these antecedents, Platonic idealism, Gnostic dualism, romantic nostalgia, mythic gatekeeping, Nietzschean recursion, theosophical structure, and ritual initiation, form the cultural and philosophical lattice that supports Lovecraft's silver key. It is not original in its parts, but radically unique in their synthesis. He did not invent the key, he inverted it. In Lovecraft's hands, what was once sacred becomes unsettling. What was once redemptive becomes recursive, and what was once symbolic becomes literally dangerous. As we proceed, we must turn now to the very language used to construct this peril. If the key has symbolic power, then that power is embedded in diction, in etymology, in the choice of words that blur the line between portal and abyss. In the next section, we will analyze the etymology and symbolic language of the silver key itself, and uncover how vocabulary becomes incantation. The symbolic potency of the silver key does not reside solely in its mythic function or metaphysical implications. It is encoded quite literally in the language Lovecraft employs to describe it. Words in Lovecraft's fiction are never neutral. They operate simultaneously as narrative, incantation, and psychological contagion. In The Silver Key and its sequel. Through the gates of the silver key, diction becomes device, a tool for disorientation, a veil through which the reader glimpses, not fully perceives, the structure of the unseen. The key itself, before unlocking any physical portal, first penetrates the mind through metaphor. We must recognize that the very words silver and key are not incidental descriptors, but etymological traps, archetypal signifiers whose meanings echo across cultures, time, and dream. Begin with silver, a metal that throughout history has connoted duality, reflection, and the false promise of illumination. Unlike gold, associated with permanence, the sun, and incorruptible truth, silver is linked to the moon, the subconscious, and illusion. In alchemical symbolism, silver corresponds to the feminine principle, to Luna, to dreams and fluidity. It is not stable. It does not radiate light, but reflects it, suggesting that what it reveals is always indirect, distorted, or incomplete. This is no accident. Lovecraft's selection of the term silver situates the key within a lunar, nocturnal semiotic field, one tied to ambiguity, to transitional states, to the veil between waking and dreaming. Silver is the light of half-knowing. It is not truth. It is the shimmer of something just beyond apprehension. Consider carefully. The key does not gleam with certainty. It flickers with doubt. The term key itself, though deceptively simple, carries a vast symbolic and linguistic genealogy. Deriving from the Old English sayagi, its ultimate Indo-European roots remain uncertain, an etymological gap that mirrors the thematic gaps in Lovecraft's narrative structure. Across myths, religions, and literature, the key functions not merely as a tool, but as an emblem of initiation, control, and restricted access. In medieval allegory, keys signified spiritual discernment or moral authority. In Freudian analysis, they appear as phallic symbols, agents of penetration and unlocking of the unconscious. In religious iconography, they are held by gatekeepers, by saints, by gods, and by monsters. Lovecraft's use of the word key, especially in recurrent pairings with gate, threshold, portal, and door, activates all these layers simultaneously. It is not just a key, it is the key to memory, to identity, to madness, to time. The indefinite becomes definite, the symbolic becomes fatal. Lovecraft's syntax reinforces this fatalism. His prose surrounding the key is rife with recursive phrasing, clauses that loop back on themselves, and excessive adjectival layering. This is not mere style, it is narrative mimicry of cognitive instability. Repeated invocations of phrases such as the lost and golden past, the outer gulfs, or the boundless abysses of dream are not meant to clarify. They are designed to overwhelm. The key is always described in relation to intangibles, curiously wrought, covered with ancient symbols, glinting with an otherworldly sheen. We never learn its precise shape or mechanics. What we receive instead is linguistic saturation, an excess of modifiers that undermine specificity. The reader, like Carter, is not shown the truth of the key, but is led into its conceptual orbit, where certainty evaporates. We must pause here. The silver key is not revealed through image, but through invocation. It exists because it is described. This technique aligns Lovecraft with certain traditions of mystical and sacred language. In Kabbalistic cosmology, for example, words are not labels for things, they are the things. The name of God, if uttered, precisely alters reality. In Sufi mysticism, recitation of the dhikr leads the devotee beyond language into ecstatic union. Even in Christian mystical theology, as in the writings of Pseudo-Dionysius, language functions apophatically. God is approached not through direct assertion, but through a cloud of unknowing. Lovecraft, though secular and materialist, deploys language with similar reverence and caution. His descriptions approach the sacred by way of negation. The key is not quite metal, not wholly seen, inscribed with symbols whose meaning escaped human cognition. It is not described, it is circled. Like mystical texts, Lovecraft's language signals that the object of inquiry cannot be held, only hinted at. Furthermore, Lovecraft uses lexical fields strategically to create a linguistic threshold effect. When Carter encounters the key or approaches the gates it unlocks, the prose shifts noticeably. Abstract nouns proliferate: infinity, identity, consciousness, abyss, while concrete reference vanish. Time becomes eternity, space becomes gulfs, and the self becomes a thing which had known the all. In these passages, the grammar itself destabilizes. Subject-verb-object relationships blur. Pronouns slip. Sentences stretch beyond conventional readability. This is no accident. Lovecraft is using language not to explain the key, but to perform its effect. The prose simulates the disintegration of ordinary cognition. Readers do not learn what the key does. They experience what it feels like to stand before the door it opens. The horror here is not visual, but semantic. It is also worth noting the circular repetition of key terms across both the silver key and through the gates of the silver key. Words like gate, symbol, dream, form, and identity appear with obsessive regularity, often within close proximity. This repetition operates hypnotically. It enacts what we might call a textual ritual, an incantatory pattern that primes the mind for altered perception. The key is thus not only a fictional object, but a linguistic structure embedded in the rhythm of the narrative itself. One might ask, is the key described or is it performed? The answer is not simple. It is not one or the other. It is both. It is not a metaphor within the story. It is the story's operating logic, encoded in every turn of phrase. In the end, Lovecraft's linguistic choices render the silver key a paradox. It is a symbol of access whose description is a form of withholding. It is a linguistic object whose power lies in destabilizing the language used to describe it, and it is a fictional device that functions as a philosophical weapon, undermining the reader's trust in perception, identity, and comprehension. We must consider the possibility that the silver key is not a thing at all, but a verb, a literary act that changes those who read about it. The next section will explore how Lovecraft reinforces this transformation through narrative design and mythic construction. If language lays the trap, then it is myth building and narrative authenticity that spring it. If the silver key exerts such uncanny power over the reader, it is not merely because of what it symbolizes or how it is described, but because of the illusion that it has always existed. Lovecraft's genius lies in his ability to present invented artifacts, locations, and histories with such textual authority that they seem recovered rather than created. In The Silver Key and Through the Gates of the Silver Key, he deploys the literary strategy of mythopoeic realism, the fabrication of mythic structures using documentary and pseudo-scholarly techniques. This is not world-building in the sense of fantasy cartography or Tolkien-esque detail. It is a more subtle, insidious operation, designed to blur the boundary between fiction and metaphysical assertion. We must recognize that Lovecraft is not inviting belief, but simulating authenticity, producing the sensation of ancientness, of secret knowledge recovered, not invented. And once that sensation takes hold, the key's symbolic function shifts. It is no longer a literary device. It becomes a conceptual contagion. Lovecraft's most effective technique for achieving this is framing narrative through nested documents. The silver key is never presented directly. Instead, we receive reports about it, manuscripts, testimonies, accounts filtered through other minds. Through the Gates of the Silver Key, the entire tale is structured as a transcript of a strange legal hearing, a format borrowed from realist fiction and adapted to metaphysical horror. This technique mimics academic or legal writing, using bureaucratic formalism to frame cosmic absurdity. By presenting the unbelievable in the rhetorical structure of credibility, Lovecraft destabilizes the reader's defenses. The mind recognizes the format, letters, testimonies, scholarly commentary, even as the content undermines logic. The cumulative effect is epistemological. Doubt becomes not a byproduct of the story, but its very medium. We must pause here and consider the character of Randolph Carter, whose repeated appearances across Lovecraft's fiction elevate him from protagonist to philosophical exemplar. Carter functions as both author surrogate and narrative mystic, a stand-in for Lovecraft's own intellectual and imaginative dilemmas. In earlier tales like The Statement of Randolph Carter, 1919, he is a passive witness to the supernatural. In The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, 1927, he becomes the seeker of lost dream realms. And in The Silver Key, 1926, he is the tragic philosopher who remembers too much. By the time of Through the Gates of the Silver Key, 1932, Carter is no longer simply a man. He is an idea unraveling, a personality dissolving into its multiversal echoes. His transformation into the wizard Scalba, trapped in an alien body, completes the arc, from witness to seeker to revelation to obliteration. The key is his instrument, but it is also his undoing. Through Carter, Lovecraft dramatizes the consequences of mythic engagement. The reader, like the character, is drawn in, only to be unmade. This unmaking is reinforced by Lovecraft's careful use of pseudo-historical layering. He names fictional books, the Unaussprechlichen Kulten, the Eltdown Shards, the Pennacotic manuscripts, alongside real ones, like the Sefer Yetzirah or the Egyptian Book of the Dead. He situates invented locations, Ulthar, Seliphias, Kadath, within actual geographic or mythic frameworks. The result is a textual palimpsest, where invention lies atop inherited cultural memory. The silver key is never treated as merely one artifact among many. It is consistently referenced in relation to ancient rites, forbidden knowledge, and interdimensional thresholds that imply a deep time far exceeding human history. This approach mimics the scholarly style of comparative mythology or religious anthropology, where fragmentary evidence is synthesized into speculative systems. The myth, in Lovecraft's hands, does not announce itself. It emerges like a fossil, excavated from strata of prose. Another key technique in Lovecraft's myth-building is the motif of recurrence, which imbues his invented elements with the weight of inevitability. The key is not discovered, it is remembered. Carter does not stumble upon it by accident. He seeks it because he once knew it in dreams. This narrative structure, recollection rather than acquisition, places the key within a cyclical framework. It has always been there, just forgotten. In this sense, the key participates in what Mircea Eliade called the myth of the eternal return, a movement backward into sacred time. But again, Lovecraft distorts the model. There is no comfort in return, no homecoming. Instead, there is only the horror of recognition, that the self is a loop, that identity is a hallucination. The myth does not resolve, it recurs, and each time it does, it pulls the reader deeper into its gravity well. Lovecraft also manipulates narrative tempo and voice to simulate authenticity. His prose alternates between archaic flourishes and quasi-scientific formality, cyclopean, pre-human, non-Euclidean, hyperdimensional. This blend of the antique and the technical gives the impression that the story straddles two epistemologies, the mystical and the empirical. The silver key, described with both reverence and analysis, becomes an object that resists categorical placement. Is it magic? Technology? A symbolic relic? The text refuses to say. And this refusal, this deliberate ambiguity, mimics the function of sacred relics in religious traditions, objects whose power lies precisely in their resistance to explanation. The key is not explained because it cannot be. Its mystery is its authority. The more it evades comprehension, the more its reality solidifies in the reader's mind. In this light, we may conclude that Lovecraft's myth-building strategy is not about constructing a consistent world, but about simulating an ancient fracture, a break in ordinary reality through which the reader glimpses something that feels older than fiction. The authenticity comes not from detail, but from tone, not from coherence, but from suggestion and withholding. The silver key exists in the same way ancient sacred texts exist, not as objects of knowledge, but as invitation to speculation, to awe, to dread. We must consider the possibility that the key is not part of the mythos. It is its keystone, the device that converts narrative into doctrine, story into secret. In the next section, we will leave behind the origins of the key and enter the second phase of our investigation, its nature and themes. For if the key truly opens doors, then we must now ask, what lies beyond them? At its conceptual core, the silver key is not merely a narrative device, but a philosophical articulation of Lovecraft's deepest metaphysical anxieties. It functions less as a literal object and more as an axis around which the central tenets of cosmic horror, insignificance, entropy, and the unreliability of perceived reality are given form. In this framework, the key's purpose is not to resolve tension, but to intensify it. It does not offer clarity, but collapse. It is not the answer to a mystery. It is the mechanism by which the illusion of coherence is dismantled. We must recognize that the silver key is not a key to other places. It is a key to the limits of human thought, a symbolic crowbar inserted into the structure of mind itself. The first of these concepts, cosmic insignificance, is perhaps the most widely recognized principle in Lovecraftian philosophy. Humanity, in his worldview, is not the protagonist of the universe, but an incidental outgrowth of blind cosmic processes. The silver key illustrates this not through apocalyptic spectacle, but through existential redirection. When Randolph Carter retrieves the key and uses it to return to his lost dream realm, he does not find transcendence in the conventional sense. Rather, he confronts the irrelevance of the self within a multiverse that obeys no moral, spiritual, or anthropocentric logic. In Through the Gates of the Silver Key, Carter encounters the supreme archetype, a cosmic intelligence of which all individual identities are fragments. He is told, "You are not Randolph Carter. You have never been Randolph Carter. You are a projection of a deeper pattern that stretches beyond time." This is not metaphor. It is metaphysical severance. The key does not unlock new worlds. It dismantles the illusion that this one ever mattered. The second concept, entropy, is manifest in the way the silver key operates on narrative and metaphysical levels. In thermodynamic terms, entropy describes the tendency of systems to move from order to disorder. Lovecraft transforms this scientific principle into a metaphysical terror, portraying the universe not as malevolent, but as profoundly uncaring, an endless descent into fragmentation. The key, far from restoring wholeness, initiates Carter's decomposition into multiplicity. He does not become one with the cosmos, he becomes lost in it. In the later story, his identity splinters across countless incarnations, including the alien entity Zikauba. He can no longer determine which self is real, nor can he return to a stable frame of reference. Time folds, space loops, personality dissolves. The key, then, becomes an agent of metaphysical entropy. It does not destroy Carter, it diffuses him into indistinction. This reveals something profound, that, in Lovecraft's cosmology, to seek ultimate truth is to invite ultimate dissolution. A third concept, subtler yet equally terrifying, is the collapse of the distinction between dream and reality. In The Silver Key, Carter's dissatisfaction with adult life stems from the loss of his ability to access dream, once a realm of significance, now a source of alienation. The key allows him to re-enter that world, but at the cost of dislocating reality itself. Dreams in Lovecraft's dream cycle are not symbolic but coextensive with existence. They are alternate ontologies, legitimate, self-consistent realms that intersect with waking life in unpredictable and destabilizing ways. In Carter's journey, the dream world reveals itself to be not merely memory, but a deeper structure of being. One could say it is not that Carter returns to the dream, but that waking life was the dream all along. Consider carefully. If dream and waking states are ontologically equivalent, then the boundary separating sense from madness, reality from illusion, has no objective anchor. The key does not show Carter the truth. It strips away the capacity to distinguish truth at all. This ambiguity extends to epistemology, the philosophy of knowledge itself. The Silver Key initiates what might be called epistemic collapse. The more Carter knows, the less stable his perception becomes. Every revelation opens further questions, each more disorienting than the last. This structure of deferred understanding mirrors the experience of encountering a philosophical system that explains too much. So much, in fact, that the self can no longer maintain coherence within it. Through the Gates of the Silver Key dramatizes this when Carter learns that all consciousness is connected, that the divisions between minds, species, and realities are artificial. His reaction is not enlightenment, but panic. The text tells us, his mind reeled, not at the strangeness of it, but at the impossibility of holding it all without breaking. The key reveals the impossibility of containment. Human thought, like a vessel, cracks under the pressure of the infinite. These themes place Lovecraft within a lineage of thinkers and writers who explored the danger of knowing too much. In classical tragedy, hubris brings downfall. In romanticism, forbidden knowledge leads to alienation, as in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But Lovecraft goes further. His protagonists do not err in seeking too much. They are destroyed precisely because the universe offers no safe quantity of knowledge at all. The Silver Key formalizes this danger. It is the physical embodiment of the idea that perception is a trap and that reality, once unmasked, does not care about the one who dares to see it. In this, Lovecraft anticipates the condition of postmodern philosophy, especially in thinkers like Baudrillard or Lyotard, for whom reality is simulation and knowledge is always partial, recursive, and undermining of the self who seeks it. And yet, despite all this dissolution, the Silver Key remains alluring. Why? Perhaps because it speaks to a deeper human impulse, not just the will to know, but the will to unknow. To dissolve into the cosmos is not simply terrifying, it is seductive. The key offers escape not from death, but from individuality, that fragile, painful fiction upon which consciousness is built. In this light, the key is a paradox. It is both the poison and the cure. It does not destroy Carter's mind in the way a monster might devour a man. Rather, it leads him to a realization so profound, so intimate, that the only possible response is self-erasure. As we move into the next section, we will explore this erasure in more concrete terms, by examining the entities and forces involved. For no key opens a door without revealing who or what waits on the other side. If the silver key functions as a threshold, then it necessarily implies a beyond, something or someone on the other side of the veil. But Lovecraft, ever careful to withhold resolution, populates that beyond, not with discrete gods or monsters, but with principles personified, the entities that appear in connection with the key, most notably Yog-Sothoth, the supreme archetype, and the alien consciousness known as Zakauba, are not antagonists in the traditional sense. They are conceptual frameworks given symbolic form. They do not act with malice or intention. They are not evil. They are prior. To encounter them is not to enter a new world. It is to lose one's capacity to distinguish world from self, agency from environment, name from essence. We must understand these entities not as characters, but as cosmological revelations, each bearing implications that render the human frame of reference obsolete. Most prominent among these is Yog-Sothoth, a being whose presence haunts Lovecraft's wider mythos and becomes central in Through the Gates of the Silver Key. Referred to as the key and the gate, Yog-Sothoth does not simply control access to other dimensions. It is the medium of access itself. It is space-time made sentient, or, more precisely, space-time as sentience. In the story, it is Yog-Sothoth that permits Carter's passage into the multiverse of selves, enabling him to move beyond linear time and embodied identity. The narrator describes it with characteristic vagueness. It was an all-in-one and one-in-all of limitless being and self, not merely a thing of one space-time continuum, but allied to the ultimate animating essence of existence's whole unbounded sweep. This is not theology. It is speculative metaphysics rendered in mystical language. Yog-Sothoth is not a god to be worshipped. It is a structure to be confronted, unbearable, impersonal, and absolute. Equally disturbing is the figure of the supreme archetype, a vast intelligence or organizing pattern within which all consciousnesses, human, alien, and otherwise, are merely instantiations. This concept appears late in Through the Gates of the Silver Key, when Carter, having passed through successive levels of reality, is finally told what he truly is: a facet, a manifestation of a deeper transpersonal order. You are not alone, the voice tells him, for no entity is ever alone in the ultimate. Each is but a part of a pattern, an aspect of the one. What begins as a mystical revelation quickly curdles into ontological horror, for if Carter is not unique, then neither are his memories, his feelings, or his quest. His identity, long defended against the dissolution of dream and doubt, is exposed as illusory recursion. He is not a man traveling through dimensions. He is a reflection of reflections, an echo in an infinite hall of mirrors. Another entity complicates this trajectory: Zakauba, the Wizard of Yadith, whose mind comes to inhabit Carter's body in one of the narrative's most unsettling inversions. Zakauba is not malevolent, but he is other. He finds Carter's humanity repugnant, his thoughts intrusive. The fusion of these two consciousnesses, each alien to the other, results in a kind of psychic impasse, where both identities remain locked in perpetual, involuntary cohabitation. This scenario dramatizes the key's ultimate function: the collapse of cognitive boundaries. If Yog-Sothoth reveals that time and space are permeable, and the supreme archetype reveals that individuality is false, then Zakauba reveals the unbearable reality that minds are not sovereign. To possess a body is not to be its only inhabitant. Carter's body becomes contested ground, a vessel split between incompatible intelligences. In this, Lovecraft prefigures modern anxieties about consciousness, memory, and selfhood, questions now explored in neuroscience, simulation theory, and philosophy of mind. Beyond these named entities, the inhabitants of the dreamlands play a more ambiguous role. While not explicitly described as cosmic forces, their symbolic weight suggests deeper implications. Places like Ulthar, Kadoth, and Celiphius are not just locales. They are psychic topographies, crystallized from longing, fear, and forgotten archetype. The beings that dwell within them, talking cats, cloud-shrouded priests, pale mask-wearers, function less as characters and more as personifications of states of consciousness. They are dream entities, yes, but dreams in Lovecraft are not products of the mind. They are autonomous regions that the mind enters where it is vulnerable. The Silver Key, by enabling access to these realms, reveals not that they are fiction, but that waking life is merely another room in the same vast house. These entities, then, are neither real nor unreal. They are archetypal projections, but projections of what precisely remains unanswered. We must consider the broader function of these entities within Lovecraft's metaphysical system. Unlike the pantheons of mythology or theology, they do not organize the cosmos, nor do they offer moral structure. They are depersonalized intensities, abstractions with just enough symbolic coherence to be named, but never explained. Their very indifference is the horror. They do not oppose humanity. They ignore it. The Silver Key does not summon them, nor do they answer its use. They simply are, existing beyond causality, agency, or intention. In this, Lovecraft departs from traditional horror models, replacing threat with inscrutability. His monsters do not chase, they radiate. His gods do not punish, they reveal. And what they reveal is the false premise of the human perspective itself. Finally, it is necessary to emphasize that the key does not open a path to a singular being, place, or truth. It opens onto a system of interlocking principles, selfhood as fiction, time as multiplicity, reality as permeable, knowledge as corrosive. The beings that populate this system, Yog-Sothoth, the archetype, Zakauba, are not antagonists to be overcome, but facets of a totality that Carter, and by extension the reader, cannot survive intact. Their presence underscores the fatal mistake of interpretation, to treat the key as a map, when in truth it is a trap. In the next section, we will observe how this trap functions within the human psyche, how Carter's interactions with these forces illustrate the role of madness not as failure, but as the inevitable consequence of knowing too much. In traditional narrative structures, human interaction with the unknown often follows a recognizable arc: confrontation, resistance, comprehension, and resolution. But in Lovecraft's mythos, especially as it pertains to the Silver Key, this structure is deliberately fractured. Interaction is not dialogic, not reciprocal. The human does not engage the unknown in order to learn. Rather, the unknown dismantles the human as a condition of encounter. Randolph Carter's journey through the key does not reveal madness as an aberration, but as a logical endpoint, a necessary effect of perception. We must recognize that in Lovecraft's philosophical vision, madness is not a failure of reason. It is the price of revelation. And in that equation, the seeker is never the hero, only the sacrifice. Carter's descent begins in innocence. His use of the key is framed not as an act of hubris, but as one of restoration, a longing to reclaim the visionary power of childhood dreams. Yet that very act becomes the engine of his undoing. In the Silver Key, his return to dream is treated with near poetic reverence, a golden glow, a peace that the waking world had long since abandoned. But this is not a return, it is a reversion, a regression from stable identity into an older, deeper awareness that cannot coexist with ordinary human consciousness. Through the gates of the Silver Key, this process intensifies. Carter becomes aware that he is not a man dreaming of gods, but a god who once dreamed he was a man. The shift is catastrophic. The I is no longer anchored. Memory fractures, identity collapses, language falters. He does not go mad because he learns something untrue. He goes mad because what he learns dissolves the framework by which he can be said to exist. This narrative trajectory situates Carter within the archetype of the seeker, a recurring figure in myth and philosophy. Oedipus, Faust, Prometheus, even Adam. The seeker desires not comfort, but comprehension, often at ruinous cost. In Lovecraft's world, however, the cost is not punishment for transgression. It is the inescapable result of truth. Carter's journey is not a fall from grace. It is a fall into scale, the realization of one's own triviality within an uncaring and incomprehensible multiverse. He passes through a series of transformations, each stripping away a layer of the self, from man to dreamer to multi-dimensional mind, to a mere expression of a larger pattern. His final state, locked in the body of the alien wizard Scauba, is not insanity in the conventional sense. It is cognitive incompatibility. His mind is no longer aligned with the parameters of human perception. He is awake, but in the wrong world, speaking the wrong language, thinking the wrong thoughts. This raises a deeper question. What is madness in Lovecraft's cosmology? It is not the chaotic frenzy of Gothic lunacy, nor is it the violent derangement of pulp antagonists. It is, rather, a form of ontological incompatibility, a structural misalignment between the mind and the real. Carter's madness is calm, reflective, even philosophical. It does not scream, it contemplates, and it comprehends too much. In this sense, Lovecraft's madness aligns with certain forms of existential anxiety, as explored by philosophers like Kierkegaard, Heidegger, and Sartre. The confrontation with the infinite, whether conceived as death, absurdity, or radical freedom, produces a vertigo of the self. In Carter's case, this vertigo is literalized. He perceives all his possible selves, all at once, across all space and time. The self becomes multiplicity. The mind becomes unstable not because it is weak, but because it is overloaded. We must pause here, and note that this vision of madness is inverted from conventional horror tropes. In most stories, madness isolates. In Lovecraft, it universalizes. Carter's insights do not remove him from the world. They expose that there was never a world in the way he understood it. The boundaries between self and other, dream and waking, life and death, no longer hold. Madness becomes not the breaking of the mind, but its reconfiguration around truths it cannot unsee. This reflects a broader theme in cosmic horror, that the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can remain sane while imagining. The silver key does not damage Carter's mind. It expands it beyond functionality. Like a circuit flooded with too much current, it shorts not because it is flawed, but because it was never designed for such power. A useful comparison can be drawn here to the concept of the sublime in romantic aesthetics, the moment when the mind encounters something so vast, so incomprehensible, that it experiences awe and terror simultaneously. Edmund Burke described the sublime as that which excites the ideas of pain and danger, and produces the strongest emotion which the mind is capable of feeling. Lovecraft amplifies this affect into a metaphysical extreme. The sublime becomes unsustainable. The mind can glimpse it, but not retain it. Through the gates of the Silver Key, Carter's moment of full revelation is brief but irreversible. He saw the very texture of space-time warping about him, and the voids between realities pulsing with strange resonance. This is not an insight. It is an infection. The experience alters him permanently. He cannot return to his former self because that self never truly existed. It was a construct of ignorance. And yet, despite this terrifying transformation, Lovecraft does not entirely condemn Carter. There is, buried within the horror, a kind of tragic nobility in his pursuit. He is not destroyed by accident. He chooses to know. His madness is not failure. It is sacrifice. The Silver Key offers what no religion or science can promise, a glimpse beyond the veil. But what it reveals is not comfort, not salvation, not reunion. It is truth unfiltered, and truth, in Lovecraft's fiction, is always destabilizing. As we turn now to the final section of this part, we must explore the natural consequence of such destabilization. Not just madness, but the total collapse of epistemology. What does it mean to know, when knowledge no longer supports identity, coherence, or sanity? In the next section, we confront the ultimate danger of the Silver Key: forbidden knowledge and epistemic collapse. In Lovecraft's cosmology, the most dangerous revelation is not that we are insignificant, but that we were never prepared to know anything at all. The Silver Key in this regard is not simply a mechanism of access. It is a test of the mind's structural integrity under impossible epistemological pressure. Once used, it does not open the door to knowledge in the academic or mystical sense. It opens the awareness that knowledge itself is a trap, that the desire to understand is not noble but fatal. In this final stage of Carter's journey, we do not witness an expansion of comprehension. We observe the collapse of the framework through which comprehension is possible. This is not revelation, it is the unmaking of epistemology. The silver key does not say, "Here is the truth." It whispers, "There is no stable mind left to know it." To explore this, we must first understand what Lovecraft means by forbidden knowledge. Unlike religious taboos or ethical prohibitions, forbidden knowledge in Lovecraft is ontological. It violates the very categories by which reality is organized. It is not forbidden by law or deity, but by the limitations of human perception. Carter's encounter with the supreme archetype and through the gates of the Silver Key reveals this most clearly. The knowledge he receives is not concealed because it is dangerous in a practical sense. It is concealed because it exceeds the bounds of what a human mind can house without fracturing. The realization that one is not a singular, coherent entity, but a branching configuration of infinite selves, stretched across alien bodies and non-linear timelines, does not offer empowerment. It renders thought itself incoherent. Carter is not punished for seeking knowledge. He is transformed by contact with its structure. This structure is not only foreign to the mind, it is hostile to its architecture. Lovecraft's narrative techniques echo this theme. The prose becomes increasingly dense, abstract, and recursive. Sentences loop, modifiers stack, meanings blur. As Carter's journey deepens, the language mirrors his epistemic unraveling. He moves from certainty to speculation, from speculation to contradiction, from contradiction to silence. This movement is not just thematic, it is experiential. The reader, like Carter, begins to feel the ground shift beneath linguistic markers. Time becomes polyhedral. Identity becomes echo. Space is an iridescent latticework of meaning whose angles defied naming. We must pause here and recognize what this means. Lovecraft is dramatizing the moment at which language fails as a technology of reality. The key does not reveal a new truth. It breaks the reader's ability to believe in the possibility of truth at all. The philosophical implications are vast. In The Silver Key and its sequel, Lovecraft stages what might be called epistemological nihilism, the assertion that no knowledge is secure because the knowing subject itself is unstable. Carter's realization that he is a fragment of a greater pattern, endlessly repeating across multiple selves, obliterates the foundations of Cartesian identity. "I think, therefore I am" becomes incoherent when the I is not singular, and the act of thinking is distributed across incommensurable bodies and dimensions. In this regard, Lovecraft extends Descartes' nightmare, not the fear that a demon deceives us, but the fear that no singular self exists to be deceived in the first place. The key unlocks a revelation that undermines the knower, not just the known. It is not a tool of knowledge, it is a paradox generator, an object that initiates endless loops of thought that cannot resolve. This collapse is more than intellectual. It is spiritual in the most destabilizing sense. In classical mystical traditions, revelation leads to union with the divine. But in Lovecraft, revelation leads only to depersonalization, to the loss of any anchor from which meaning might emerge. Carter becomes aware that his previous understanding of self, time, space, morality, even causality, were parochial illusions. In this sense, Lovecraft's vision is darker than atheism. It is not that there are no gods. It is that there are patterns too vast to be gods, too indifferent to be moral, and too foundational to be resisted. The forbidden knowledge revealed by the Silver Key is not simply too much. It is too foundationally incompatible. It shows that all systems of understanding, religious, scientific, psychological, are quaint overlays on something utterly alien to human cognitive structure. And yet, one must ask, if this knowledge is truly beyond human capacity, how does Carter grasp it? The answer is both unsettling and profound. He doesn't. The narrative itself becomes strained in the attempt. Lovecraft resorts to evasions, ellipses, and paradoxical formulations. Sentences like, "He saw something which could not be seen and knew something that could not be thought," are not poetic flourishes. They are signposts of epistemic collapse. They signal the failure of language, the dissolution of frame, the corruption of category. The Silver Key's revelation cannot be represented. It can only be approximated, and even that approximation warps the medium that tries to contain it. The story's structure becomes part of the story's meaning. Carter's journey is not merely narrated, it is enacted through the disintegration of narrative logic. This finally is what sets Lovecraft's treatment of forbidden knowledge apart. In lesser horror, the forbidden is shocking. In religious texts, it is sacred. In conspiracy fiction, it is concealed. But in Lovecraft, it is epistemologically radioactive. It does not need to be hidden. It is perfectly visible, but no one can hold it for long without losing the capacity to remain human. The silver key becomes the icon of this condition, a small, gleaming object that promises insight and delivers disassembly. It is not evil. It is not good. It simply functions. And that function is annihilation of the mind's architecture. We must consider, then, what this implies for us as readers. If we understand the key, even in metaphor, have we already passed the point of no return? As we conclude this part of our investigation, we leave behind the abstractions of concept and enter the realm of text. How did these ideas manifest within Lovecraft's literature? What patterns of symbol, structure, and revelation can we trace across his stories? In Part 3, we will examine the literary manifestations of the Silver Key, its earliest appearances, its major narrative case studies, and the broader mythos it helped shape. For what begins as a symbol of passage will become a recurring threshold in Lovecraft's fiction, the point where knowing becomes forgetting, and identity becomes plural. The Silver Key did not emerge in isolation. It is the narrative culmination of motifs, archetypes, and thematic undercurrents that Lovecraft had been developing across his earlier work, especially within what scholars call the dream cycle. While The Silver Key, 1926, and its sequel Through the Gates of the Silver Key, 1932-33, are the only stories in which the key explicitly appears, its conceptual scaffolding is visible much earlier, in texts where the tension between dream and waking, self and cosmos, already begins to strain. We must recognize that the key is less a singular invention than the ritual condensation of multiple literary ancestors, an object that could only have emerged once Lovecraft's dreamer protagonists had exhausted the limits of their own desire to know. The earliest significant ancestor is The White Ship, 1919, one of Lovecraft's most overt homages to Lord Dunsany. In it, a lighthouse keeper named Basil Elton embarks on a dream voyage through fantastical lands, guided by a mysterious bearded figure. The story presents a familiar trajectory. The seeker journeys through increasingly wondrous realms, culminating in the approach to the ideal city of Cathuria, which vanishes just before it can be reached. The moral seems deceptively clear. Elton wakes, his voyage lost, his chance at paradise ruined. But the deeper implication is that yearning itself is a trap, and that ideal knowledge may be fundamentally incompatible with human limitation. No key is present in this story, but the structural logic that will define it, longing as doom, revelation as dissolution, is firmly in place. The Silver Key, in later texts, simply provides the mechanism for that same metaphysical trajectory. This same structure appears again in Sisyphus, 1920, where the protagonist, Kuranes, discovers a dream city of his own design, one he eventually inhabits permanently after his death in waking life. Though framed as a form of triumph, Kuranes' fate is quietly disturbing. He does not transcend reality, he abandons it. He retreats into his own constructed dream world, a place devoid of other minds, other pasts, or consequences. It is a solipsistic heaven, or perhaps a psychosis. The boundary between fantasy and madness blurs, just as it does later with Carter and the Silver Key. Kuranes, like Carter, is not punished. He is lost. We must pause here and consider the possibility that the Silver Key is a formalization of this pattern, a narrative device that converts earlier allegories of escape into direct confrontations with cosmic structure. Where dream once offered refuge, the key ensures that dream becomes reality's dismantling agent. A critical turning point comes in the dream quest of unknown Kadoth, begun in 1926, where Randolph Carter first fully emerges as Lovecraft's sustained metaphysical surrogate. In this novella-length tale, Carter journeys through the dreamlands in search of a golden city he glimpsed in sleep. The journey is labyrinthine, populated by night gaunts, talking cats, faceless priests, and forgotten gods. Carter's quest ends in cruel irony. The city he seeks is a dream memory of his childhood home. He had been chasing his own lost past all along. But more importantly, he is told by the gods of earth that he may not stay. That paradise glimpsed in dream must remain unreachable. Here, the silver key is notably absent, but its absence is symbolic. There is no key because there is no access. The yearning remains unfulfilled. Carter's longing is its own closed loop, and so the silver key, introduced later, becomes a kind of narrative correction, a device that grants access too late and at too great a cost. The intertextual resonance continues in the statement of Randolph Carter, 1919, often overlooked in discussions of the key but essential to understanding Carter's literary trajectory. In that tale, Carter recounts a terrifying expedition into a crypt with a friend who descends into darkness and sends back increasingly disturbing messages, culminating in the now famous line, "You fool, Warren is dead." The narrative ends abruptly, with Carter as the traumatized survivor. Here, we glimpse the first rupture. Carter confronts something beneath the earth, something unknowable and final. He is left with no answers. What begins as a conventional horror story is, in retrospect, a philosophical seed. Carter's curiosity fails. He survives, but in ignorance. The silver key reverses this. Carter's later journeys do not end in terror, but in dissolution by understanding. In both cases, knowledge fails to console. The only difference is how far the door opens. We must also acknowledge how Lovecraft positions the key in relation to other cosmic objects and texts, especially the Necronomicon. While the Necronomicon is often cited as the primary emblem of forbidden knowledge in Lovecraft's mythos, it differs in function from the key. The book offers information, rituals, names, histories. The key offers transformation. It initiates change within the structure of being. If the Necronomicon tells you what to fear, the silver key makes you become what you fear. This difference is crucial. One is linguistic, the other ontological. The Necronomicon terrifies because of what it reveals. The key terrifies because of what it does. Together, they form a kind of dual epistemology, language and symbol, text and talisman. Their frequent co-mention in later stories is not accidental. They are not separate artifacts. They are complementary devices in the machinery of unmaking. Thus, the silver key must be seen not merely as an object within two stories, but as the narrative crystallization of a decade-long meditation. It emerges not from sudden invention, but from literary accumulation, from earlier themes of longing, memory, dream, and terror. Each preceding tale adds a layer. The White Ship introduces the lure of the unreachable. Celophaeus demonstrates the price of escape. The Dream Quest reveals the futility of seeking. The statement embeds the trauma of the unknown. The key gathers these motifs, distills them, and renders them tactile. It is not just a key. It is the hinge on which Lovecraft's dream cycle turns, from fantasy into cosmicism, from wish to ruin. As we proceed, we will examine this transition in depth by turning to the key's primary textual appearances, beginning with the story that bears its name. Of all the tales in Lovecraft's corpus, the Silver Key stands apart in its quiet devastation. First published in 1929 in Weird Tales, but written 3 years earlier, the story lacks the monsters, rituals, or alien vistas that typically define cosmic horror. Instead, it offers something subtler and, arguably, more haunting. The death of the modern mind's last defenses. In this text, Lovecraft does not merely describe the loss of enchantment, he enacts it. Randolph Carter, now 30, finds himself severed from the dream worlds that once gave his life shape and meaning. Waking life, described in the story with increasing bitterness, has overtaken dream. But rather than accept this disillusionment as maturity, Carter seeks return. The result is not rejuvenation, it is dissolution. We must understand the Silver Key not as a story of discovery, but as a metaphysical suicide note written in allegorical prose. The plot, such as it is deceptively simple. Carter, disillusioned with the modern world's sterility, revisits the countryside of his youth, where he discovers the titular key, an ornate, ancient object hidden in his deceased great-uncle's attic. This key enables him to re-enter the dream realm of his childhood, to recover the mythic reality he once accessed in sleep. But this apparent triumph is a narrative trap. Carter does not find his way back. He is absorbed, disappearing into the dream world, his body found later in a catatonic state, or, in some interpretations, never found at all. He vanished, the story concludes, and no trace was ever found. There is no victory here. There is only erasure. The key does not restore Carter. It returns him to a world that no longer supports the self that once desired it. Lovecraft's language throughout the story reflects this erosion. Early passages evoke the tedious plenitude of the real world, where science and logic have exorcised the specters and tamed the unknown. Carter, now a rationalist by necessity, laments the daily sights and sounds which have extinguished imagination. This is not a critique of materialism, it is a eulogy for wonder. Yet the dream world he re-enters is not described in lush detail. Rather, it is gestured at, golden, boundless, unfathomable. The dream, once vivid, is now abstract. Lovecraft offers us the silhouette of enchantment, not its presence. The key does not open a door to a new reality. It reveals how little reality can hold once one no longer believes in it. The narrator's refusal to name what Carter sees is the story's cruelest irony. The dream world has returned, but Carter's capacity to witness it has not. This technique, suggestion through absence, mirrors Lovecraft's broader philosophical argument, that ultimate knowledge lies just beyond articulation, and that to reach for it is to lose one's grip on structured meaning. In this story, the silver key is a literalization of that boundary. It is not a key to a secret chamber, but to a former state of being, one that now exists out of joint with the mind that remembers it. Carter's act of using the key is thus inherently self-destructive. He does not reclaim his dream life. He forfeits the capacity to exist in either world. As the narrator observes, it is not well to dream too much and to walk too much alone. Yet, Carter does both, and in doing so, tears a hole in the fabric of the self. Consider carefully. The dream does not reclaim him. It consumes him. We must pause here and consider what is truly forbidden in the Silver Key. It is not the dream world itself. It is the knowledge that access to that world comes at the cost of identity. Carter's adult mind, conditioned by logic, causality, and empirical reasoning, can no longer integrate the dream world's logic. The key, rather than reconciling these worlds, exacerbates their disjunction. There is no synthesis. There is only reversion. And that reversion entails a rejection of waking life's constraints. This is not fantasy as escape. It is annihilation as homecoming. One could argue that Carter does not enter a new realm at all. He simply ceases to function within the known parameters of human cognition. The key enables a kind of spiritual regression so complete that it renders the dreamer unintelligible to the waking world. It is also important to note that the story is suffused with autobiographical resonance. Lovecraft, writing in the mid-1920s, was living in economic hardship after returning from a failed attempt to find literary success in New York. His letters from the period describe profound alienation from modern life. In a 1927 letter, he writes, "The world is no longer fit for me, nor I for it." Carter's disillusionment is Lovecraft's own. The key becomes, then, a symbolic artifact of psychological retreat, an attempt to reassert the primacy of imagination against the corrosive pressure of modernity. But unlike the escapist fantasies of pulp contemporaries, Lovecraft's tale is brutal in its honesty. The escape is irreversible. The key does not unlock safety. It unlocks forgetting. Carter's fate is not victory over disillusionment. It is surrender to it in mythic form. Ultimately, the Silver Key functions as a turning point, not just in Carter's arc, but in Lovecraft's development of what we might call his ontological pessimism. The story dramatizes a principle that will govern all his later work, that human consciousness is structurally unsuited for the truths it most deeply craves. The key, though portrayed as sacred, is also a weapon. It annihilates Carter's continuity across realities. The child he was, the man he became, and the dreamer he tries to be again, all are incompatible. The key does not unify them. It reveals their incoherence. As we turn to its companion text, Through the Gates of the Silver Key, we will see this incoherence magnified into cosmological scope, for if the Silver Key dismantles the self, its sequel dismantles the universe that once sustained it. If the Silver Key is a meditation on the soul's retreat into the dream world, through the gates of the Silver Key is that meditation turned cosmic in scale and metaphysical in ambition. Co-authored with E. Hoffman Price, but substantially rewritten by Lovecraft himself, the story was serialized in Weird Tales in July 1934. It is not so much a sequel as a transformation, taking the quiet despair of Carter's disappearance and exploding it across the multidimensional lattice of existence. What begins as a surreal courtroom hearing concerning Carter's estate becomes, by its midpoint, a vast philosophical descent into space-time, consciousness, and ontology, where the Silver Key dissolved the self into memory. Through the gates annihilates memory into pattern and selfhood into expression. It is not an adventure story. It is a speculative treatise disguised as narrative, and the Silver Key becomes the initiatory vector through which Carter ceases to be a man. The framing device itself is deliberately deceptive. We begin with lawyers and witnesses gathered to settle the legal status of Randolph Carter, presumed dead. Their testimony is dry, bureaucratic, and grounded in the logic of the waking world, but their tone masks unease, particularly in Harley Warren's cousin, who believes Carter may have transcended death altogether. The testimony soon recounts Carter's use of the Silver Key in an arcane ritual involving strange symbols, non-Euclidean space, and mathematical harmonics. As he uses the key, Carter passes through a portal that transports him beyond the dreamlands and into Yog-Sothoth's realm, where the rules of physics, identity, and time no longer apply. It is here that the story transitions from legal realism to metaphysical mythography, suggesting that Carter's story, and by extension, human consciousness itself, was never local or linear, but always cosmic and recursive. The central revelation comes when Carter encounters the supreme archetype, an entity or principle that presents itself as the true form of reality, a vortex of iridescent shifting and mixing dimensions, a being not of matter or energy, but of sheer pattern and rhythm. It explains to Carter that he is not an individual in the conventional sense, but one facet of an archetypal consciousness that exists in countless manifestations across all dimensions. All that you have called yourself, it says, is but a phantom of what you are. This is not poetic flourish. It is a metaphysical statement of intent. The Silver Key in this context becomes a decoder, revealing the encoded truth that personal identity is a convenience of perception, not a fundamental property of existence. Carter is not told what he is. He is told what no one ever was, unique, self-contained, separate. As Carter passes through further gates, he is shown visions of countless versions of himself, living lives across alien worlds and in other bodies, including that of Zkauba, the Wizard of Yadith. The horror is not that these lives exist, but that they are equally real, and that Carter's consciousness can shift between them involuntarily. This vision dramatizes Lovecraft's fascination with multiverse ontology decades before the term entered scientific or pop cultural discourse. But unlike modern treatments of the multiverse, which often frame it as fertile ground for choice or possibility, Lovecraft renders it as the final negation of identity. Carter becomes unable to distinguish his thoughts from Zkauba's, and the narrative begins to lose track of who or what is speaking. He is not merely lost in space or time. He is lost in consciousness as a medium. The Silver Key has unlocked not a portal, but a condition of multiplicity that precludes continuity. We must recognize that through the gates represents a shift in Lovecraft's mythos, from ontological despair to what might be called epistemic fatalism. The key does not lead to knowledge in the traditional sense. Instead, it initiates the unraveling of the knower. As Carter learns more about his true nature, the narration itself becomes increasingly abstract, overloaded with references to polyhedral time, kaleidoscopic continua, and the final pattern of all things. These are not simply decorative phrases. They are deliberate attempts to represent the incommunicable, to write the texture of the incomprehensible. Carter's fate is not to understand, but to be overwritten by the pattern he once sought. This reveals something profound. In Lovecraft's late philosophy, truth is not simply dangerous. It is non-local, non-personal, and irreversibly transformative. The collaboration with Price also introduces an interesting tension. Price, influenced by Theosophy and occult mysticism had envisioned a story of spiritual ascent. Lovecraft, however, transformed it into something far more alien. What might have been a tale of metaphysical uplift became, under Lovecraft's hand, a disintegration of meaning. Carter does not become divine. He becomes fragmented. The text hints that even Yog-Sothoth is not a god but a principle, and the supreme archetype is no benevolent guardian but an indifferent configuration. The journey is not from ignorance to enlightenment. It is from narrative to anti-narrative, from myth to mechanism. That Lovecraft could take an ostensibly optimistic premise and convert it into one of his darkest philosophical statements speaks to the depth of his metaphysical pessimism. The story's conclusion returns us to the courtroom, where the being once known as Carter, now Zcalba, has returned to Earth, trapped in a body he does not control, unable to communicate the truths he has witnessed. His voice, when heard, is wrong. His speech is garbled. The lawyers declare him mad. But the reader understands he is not mad. He is untranslatable. The silver key has done its work. It has replaced narrative cohesion with ontological recursion. The story ends not with death or terror, but with ambiguity, an ambiguity so vast it can no longer be named. He is not the man we knew, someone says. And indeed, he is not. Perhaps he never was. In this text, the silver key reaches its full narrative potential, not as a symbol of wonder, but as a metaphysical instrument of narrative collapse. It transforms the seeker into a medium through which cosmic patterning becomes legible, however briefly. But in that legibility lies danger. To glimpse the pattern is to lose the self. As we proceed to our final section in this part, we will explore how later authors, collaborators, and inheritors of Lovecraft's legacy expanded and often distorted the function of the silver key. For even in fiction, some doors, once opened, never close completely. The silver key, like much of Lovecraft's mythos, did not remain confined to its creator. After Lovecraft's death in 1937, a host of collaborators, disciples, and literary inheritors sought to expand, systematize, and often reinterpret the artifacts and ideas he had left behind. This expansion was not merely an act of homage, it was a reconfiguration, a transformation of Lovecraft's metaphysical despair into a broader, often more mythologically structured cosmos. The silver key, once a subtle symbol of epistemic collapse and metaphysical dislocation, would in later hands become a literalized object, imbued with power, inserted into mythic hierarchies, and occasionally stripped of its original philosophical ambiguity. We must recognize that this posthumous evolution is not merely a distortion. It is a revealing act of cultural digestion. What later writers did with the key exposes not just their understanding of Lovecraft, but their need to render his terrifying abstractions narratively manageable. Chief among these reinterpretations is the work of August Derleth, Lovecraft's friend, editor, and mythologizer. Derleth sought to codify Lovecraft's mythos into a dualistic structure, forces of good and evil, elder gods and outer gods, echoing Christian cosmology. In Derleth's version of the mythos, entities like Yog-Sothoth and Nyarlathotep were framed less as alien principles and more as demonic figures to be opposed. Within this framework, the silver key becomes less an object of philosophical annihilation and more a magical implement, a tool used to access realms or summon powers. It is no longer a trap for the self, but a mechanism for crossing dimensions with purpose. This marks a crucial shift. Derleth transforms the key from a symbol of dissolution into a device of navigation. Its horror becomes instrumentalized, its ambiguity diminished. The unknowable becomes knowable. The seeker becomes a hero once more. This rationalization extended into the broader Lovecraft circle, where writers like Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Bloch, and Lynn Carter continued to reference and incorporate the silver key, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly. In Smith's work, the key occasionally surfaces as a metaphor for lost time or forgotten knowledge, retaining some of its dreamlike potency. Bloch, more psychological in his horror, rarely invoked the key directly, but gestured towards similar mechanisms of identity collapse and forbidden understanding. Lynn Carter, however, most explicitly wove the silver key into mythological systems, treating it as part of a greater pantheon of artifacts. Alongside the shining trapezohedron, the Book of Ibon, and others. In his Zothic legend cycle, Carter presents the key as one of many tools of the Great Ones, imbued with cosmic significance but narratively integrated. The result is a mythology more systematic than Lovecraft ever intended, comprehensive, but arguably less unnerving. In seeking coherence, these writers sacrifice the very instability that made the key terrifying. Later still, the key appears in the works of Brian Lumley, particularly in his Titus Crow novels, where it is incorporated into a broader heroic framework. Here, characters use the key in the manner of a sorcerer's implement, unlocking portals between planes, summoning knowledge, or resisting cosmic forces. Lumley's tone is far removed from Lovecraft's scholarly detachment or philosophical dread. It is closer to science fantasy, where the mind-breaking horrors of the mythos become foes to be outwitted or overcome. This transformation is telling. The silver key has become usable. It is no longer a symbol of the reader's collapse, but a gadget, strange, dangerous, but controllable. Consider carefully what has been lost. The key once dissolved Carter's identity into multiversal echo. Now it serves as a narrative utility. Its original function, revealing that there is no stable self to carry knowledge, has been repressed beneath genre conventions of agency, progress, and survival. And yet, even as its philosophical edge was dulled in fiction, the Silver Key's original aura survived elsewhere, particularly in non-literary appropriations. In the realms of occult subculture, role-playing games, and fan-created mythography, the key regained its symbolic potency, often reframed as an initiatory device. In the Call of Cthulhu tabletop RPG, the key is referenced in scenarios that blend dreamlands travel with psychological corruption. Players use the key to access other dimensions, but often at great cost to sanity, mirroring Lovecraft's original conception more closely than many later stories. In occult forums and esoteric communities, the key has been adopted symbolically, linked to astral projection, lucid dreaming, or chaos magic. Here, the key becomes what it was always intended to be. Not an answer, but a question in symbolic form. Its power lies not in what it opens, but in why one wishes to open anything at all. In academic circles, particularly in Lovecraftian literary criticism, the Silver Key has become emblematic of a broader theme: the failure of narrative to contain the real. Scholars such as S.T. Joshi, Donald Burleson, and Roger Luckhurst have analyzed the key as a motif of epistemological instability, linking it to Derridean deconstruction and postmodern theories of fragmented subjectivity. In this framework, the key is not a magical object at all. It is a structural device that reveals the limits of representation. Carter's failure to remain coherent across dimensions is not a failure of character, but a revelation of the text's own limits. Lovecraft's prose, increasingly abstract and recursive in the later stories, mirrors the function of the key. It attempts to say what cannot be said, to describe what should not be known. In this reading, the key is both within the story and the story itself, a metafictional signpost that warns the reader of what lies ahead. We must pause here to consider what this evolution reveals. The key began as a symbol of intellectual and spiritual longing, the desire to reconnect with dream, to return to wonder. But Lovecraft, ever suspicious of such longings, turned that desire against itself. He revealed that the dream was not a refuge but a mirror, and what it showed was not transcendence, but incoherence. Later, authors, less comfortable with such radical instability, attempted to reassert control. They gave the key function, structure, agency. But in doing so, they rendered it less dangerous, less strange, less honest. The Silver Key, in its purest form, is not an artifact to be held or used. It is a metaphor for unmaking, a narrative mechanism for destabilizing the self, and a literary trick for exposing the void behind desire. The Silver Key, though born in fiction, has not remained confined to the literary page. Over the last century, it has seeped almost imperceptibly into the margins of urban legend, occult speculation, and internet mythography. This transference from artifact of imagination to reported object of fascination reflects a peculiar pattern in the afterlife of certain fictional ideas. They do not remain fictional. They begin to behave as mimetic entities, migrating into dreams, hoaxes, blogs, and fringe forums, where their origins are often forgotten or deliberately obscured. The Silver Key, like the Necronomicon before it, now occupies the strange cultural territory reserved for those symbols that are neither real nor unreal, but contested by belief itself. We must recognize that this is not a trivial phenomenon. It is a commentary on the permeability of human cognition, and the willingness of the collective unconscious to treat symbols as experience. Reports of the Silver Key's existence outside of fiction began appearing in earnest during the 1990s, particularly in early internet occult forums such as alt.magic, alt.folklore.urban, and later on, anonymous boards like Wonajaxi. Here, users began describing dreams, synchronicities, and symbolic visions involving a silver key found in childhood homes, antique shops, or lucid dreams. One notable post from 1998, archived on early Usenet mirrors, describes a dream in which the user finds a silver key under their pillow, uses it to open a door in their attic, and finds a stairway that keeps unfolding forever. The user claimed to wake up with an overwhelming sense of déjà vu and a metallic taste in their mouth. Others soon chimed in with eerily similar experiences, unprompted, unconnected. Whether these were inspired by the Silver Key or some emergent memeplex is impossible to determine. But the pattern is familiar. Fiction begets belief, and belief reinvents fiction. In time, these digital narratives evolved into more deliberate acts of fabrication, hoaxes designed to provoke belief or ritual engagement. In the early 2000s, a series of elaborate found journal scans were posted to now-defunct LiveJournal communities, allegedly detailing the experiences of a woman who had discovered a small silver key in a box of her late grandfather's possessions. The entries describe dreams becoming more vivid, time distorting, and eventually slipping between worlds during sleep. The final entry ended with a single sentence: "I left the key inside and cannot remember who I was before." The physical journal was never produced and the user vanished, but the narrative persisted. It has since been repackaged on forums, Reddit threads, and ARG, alternate reality game, wikis as a legitimate mystery. This reveals something profound. The silver key has become a performative symbol, a story one can inhabit, replicate, or expand, regardless of its literary origin. We must pause here and consider the role of dreams in the key's cultural migration. Lovecraft himself placed the key within the dream cycle, linking it to the architecture of unconscious experience. In contemporary accounts, this link remains strong. Many self-identified lucid dreamers and astral travelers report encountering silver keys, or symbolic equivalents, during altered states. Some claim that focusing on a silver key during hypnagogic meditation can initiate a shift in perception or trigger dream control. In online spaces like the lucid dreaming subreddit, the key is treated not as Lovecraftian lore, but as an archetypal glyph, akin to the golden door, the spiral staircase, or the mirror that reflects something else. In this framework, the key becomes a Jungian artifact, representing the threshold of integration or disintegration. It is not Lovecraft's creation, but a universal psychic motif, resurfaced through narrative and reabsorbed into the unconscious. The silver key has also surfaced in the liminal space between art and myth, particularly in internet-based horror aesthetics like the creepypasta and analog horror movements. In 2012, a popular YouTube series known as The Archive Key revolved around a cryptic government project involving silver resonance artifacts that, when placed under certain frequencies, would cause time loops or identity loss. Though never explicitly citing Lovecraft, the series relied heavily on his tropes, recursion, madness, loss of self, and presented its artifacts as part of a recovered Cold War file dump. The key in this iteration was both literal and symbolic, inviting viewers to speculate, solve codes, and enact ritualized engagement. This interactivity is not incidental. It mirrors the function of the key in fiction, as an object that demands participation, interpretation, and self-exposure. The line between story and experience is deliberately blurred, and the silver key becomes a portal into the liminality of belief itself. But why does this symbol persist? Why does it continue to reappear in dreams, in hoaxes, in shared hallucinations, and digital myths? The answer may lie not in the key itself, but in what it represents. Access. The silver key promises entry, not just into forbidden spaces, but into a different order of meaning. It speaks to a hunger that is neither religious nor scientific, but metaphysical. The desire to escape the constraints of waking life, linear time, and singular identity. The fact that the key is small, silver, hidden in attics or childhood boxes, makes it intimate. It is not a weapon or relic. It is a personal secret, something always half-remembered. Its vagueness is its strength. It can mean anything, and thus, it can mean everything. Its power lies not in what it unlocks, but in what it suggests, that there is something more, if only we could remember how to reach it. In this way, the myth of the silver key continues, not as canon, not as fixed symbol, but as cultural residue. It is the ghost of a question we cannot stop asking. What if we were meant for more than this? Whether in dreams, online ephemera, or fabricated journals, the key functions as a test of the imagination's durability. Can we still believe in symbols powerful enough to dissolve the self? Can fiction still infect reality? Or are these merely echoes in the dark, artifacts of a time when symbols could still break us open? In the next section, we will explore how this myth has translated into media, games, music, and aesthetic culture. For even in the cold light of the modern world, the silver key still shimmers, quietly, ominously, just beneath the surface. The silver key has never been a staple of mainstream horror cinema, nor has it become a household symbol like the Necronomicon. Yet its influence, muted, refracted, and often uncredited, echoes across a wide spectrum of contemporary media. Unlike more overt mythos artifacts, the key's conceptual subtlety makes it less adaptable as spectacle and more potent as aesthetic residue. It is a symbol that lingers beneath surfaces, not the object shown on screen, but the logic that structures the narrative, the mood that shapes the visual palette, the mechanic that governs player agency. In this sense, the silver key has become what we might call a transmedia specter, not always named, but always present when characters cross thresholds that should not exist, remember what they were never meant to forget, or awaken to a truth that renders them other than human. In cinema, the key's influence appears most clearly in films that blur reality and dream, identity and multiplicity. Consider David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, 2001, a film structured as a dream, collapsing into waking horror. In one sequence, a mysterious blue box and its matching key trigger a shift in the film's ontological frame, revealing that characters, timelines, and even cause and effect have been misaligned. The box is never explained, and the key offers no resolution, only recursion and collapse. This dynamic mirrors the function of Lovecraft's silver key, not to unlock answers, but to unframe reality itself. Similarly, in The Cell, 2000, and The Endless, 2017, protagonists enter altered spaces where memory, perception, and selfhood become unstable. Though these films do not cite Lovecraft directly, they enact his epistemological structure, where entering the unknown remaps the self against inhuman coordinates. In interactive media, the silver key has had a more direct and systematized presence, particularly in games that employ dream logic, psychological horror, and recursive space. In Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth, 2005, players traverse hallucinations, hidden dimensions, and artifacts clearly inspired by Lovecraftian objects, though the key itself is replaced by stand-ins like glyphs or runes. The influence is conceptual. The game teaches the player that sanity is fragile, that certain truths cannot be encountered without mechanical penalty. In more recent games such as Control, 2019, and Returnal, 2021, we see the key's legacy rendered in architecture, impossible corridors, memory loops, doors that open into symbolic trauma. Control in particular features an actual key item, the Ocean View Motel key, which unlocks a dreamlike hub connecting realities. It is not a reference to Lovecraft's key per se, but the logic is the same. Objects open spaces, but the price is cognitive uncertainty. The world no longer holds. We must recognize that the key's most haunting evolution has occurred not in narrative form, but in design mechanics, especially in games where the player is both seeker and destroyer. Bloodborne, 2015, inspired heavily by cosmic horror, presents multiple keys, each symbolic, each unlocking layers of a world that devours its interpreter. Here, to use a key is to become culpable. The player's progression is not a hero's journey, but an initiation into madness. The silver key is never named, but its logic governs the system. There is no safe knowledge. There are only consequences for seeking. In this way, modern horror games do not adapt Lovecraft's key literally. They embed it in interaction. The player, like Carter, opens doors and becomes what the world permits, a participant in their own unraveling. The key's aesthetic has also migrated into music and sound, particularly in ambient, drone, and darkwave genres. Artists such as Lustmord, Northaunt, and Theologian have produced soundscapes that attempt to simulate what the key evokes: vastness, incomprehension, and dissolution. In Lustmord's album, The Place Where the Black Stars Hang, 1994, deep sub-bass frequencies and reverberating voids conjure a sense of passing through interdimensional space. The listener is not guided. They are abandoned to enormity. This is no accident. Lovecraft's stories often reference unnameable sounds, the piping of flutes, the low vibration of unknown matter. In sonic adaptations, the key becomes frequency. Music becomes portal. Some contemporary ritual artists, such as Sleep Research Facility, explicitly craft compositions meant to accompany dreamwork or hypnagogic trance, and a few reference the key directly, suggesting a return to Lovecraft's dreamlands as sonic landscape rather than spatial geography. In online fan culture, the key has become a visual sigil, particularly in digital art and vaporwave aesthetics. On platforms like Tumblr and DeviantArt, users create depictions of the silver key that blend Art Nouveau intricacy with cosmic minimalism. Mandalas of polished silver, keys etched with alien runes, doors floating in voids. These are not illustrations, they are meditations. Often paired with cryptic texts or faux anthropological annotations, the images suggest that the key is real, that it has always existed, that it merely waits to be recognized. This convergence of visual art, myth-building, and participatory fiction echoes the ARGs and dream sightings explored in the previous section. The key functions here not as object, but as trigger. It asks nothing. It promises nothing. But once seen, it remains. As one artist captioned their rendering, "This is the key I dreamed before I knew it had a name." What unites all of these adaptations, whether cinematic, ludic, or musical, is not fidelity to Lovecraft's text, but fidelity to his structure of destabilization. The silver key is not a popular symbol because it is dramatic. It is popular because it can be rewritten endlessly without losing its essence. It is a symbol of change that leaves the self unchanged, of passage that leads not elsewhere but inward, of unlocking as a form of forgetting. In media, it recurs because it meets a need, to articulate that which we suspect but cannot face. That truth, once glimpsed, offers no comfort, no meaning, no way back. As we now move into the cultural and academic afterlife of the key, we must ask, how do scholars, subcultures, and symbolic systems grapple with an object that unravels meaning itself? In the next section, we examine how the silver key has been reappropriated, ritually, critically, and philosophically, by those who see in its silence the reflection of our deepest modern uncertainties. The silver key, once a literary device buried in the folds of the pulp metaphysics, has undergone a strange and paradoxical elevation. No longer confined to Lovecraft's fiction, it has been adopted and adapted by a wide array of subcultures, academic disciplines, and symbolic systems. Some treat it as metaphor, others as tool, others still as a psychic trigger embedded within the cultural unconscious. In this movement from text to theory, from symbol to system, the silver key has become a liminal artifact, belonging to no single domain, yet haunting them all. It is not simply a relic of literary horror. It is a philosophical contagion, operating at the intersection of ritual, scholarship, and cultural self-analysis. We must recognize that what persists is not the key itself, but the structure of thought it enacts, the promise of access, followed by the collapse of certainty. Within the realm of modern occult and magical practice, the silver key has found an unexpected home, particularly among practitioners of chaos magic, dream work, and liminal ritual. These groups, often operating at the edges of traditional esotericism, embrace fictional mythologies as functional metaphors, tools for focusing intent, triggering altered states, and navigating unconscious terrain. In forums like Ars or Occult, or Discord servers dedicated to psychonautics, the silver key is sometimes discussed as a symbol used in guided meditation or lucid dream induction. Some report visualizing the key to initiate dream work, with claims of recurring imagery, staircases, mirrors, shifting forms, and the sensation of memory loss. These rituals, while far from canonical, point to something meaningful. The key functions not as dogma, but as an open symbol ready to be filled with subjective significance. It is not sacred because it is old. It is sacred because it feels familiar, even when newly encountered. In more formal metaphysical systems, particularly thelemic, hermetic, and post-structuralist magical traditions, the key has been likened to threshold archetypes such as the abyss, the Daath sphere in the Kabbalistic tree, or the veil between the Ruach and the Neshama. While Lovecraft disavowed all occult belief, his conceptual architectures have nonetheless been integrated into living systems of mystical thought. The silver key is sometimes interpreted as the device of initiation into non-dual awareness, or, conversely, as the instrument of ego death, the moment when the self glimpses its own artificiality and must be reconstituted or discarded. In these circles, the key's silence is part of its allure. Unlike ancient grimoires or ritual diagrams, it offers no instructions. Its power lies precisely in that withholding. It becomes, in ritual theory terms, a chaos sigil, semantically empty, energetically potent, and infinitely reframable. Academically, the silver key has received growing attention from scholars interested in speculative realism, object-oriented ontology, OO, and new materialism. In these frameworks, the key is treated not as metaphor but as narrative mattering, an object that reorganizes the relationship between subject and world. According to theorists like Graham Harman or Timothy Morton, objects do not merely participate in meaning, they withhold it, existing always beyond total access. The key, in this reading, becomes the perfect Lovecraftian object, shimmering with significance, but forever receding from explanation. Scholar Roger Luckhurst, in his broader study of Lovecraft's philosophical legacy, notes that the silver key does not merely open the dreamlands, it opens the structural tension between language and thing, between desire and recursion. This makes it uniquely valuable in theoretical discourse, not because it resolves philosophical questions, but because it reproduces them inside narrative space. We must pause here and consider the convergence of this scholarly use with the aims of postmodern literature. Writers like Jorge Luis Borges, Thomas Ligotti, and Mark Z. Danielewski have echoed the key's structural function in works, where the active inquiry becomes indistinguishable from psychological dissolution. Borges's The Aleph presents an object that contains all things, rendering the observer incapable of returning to narrative linearity. Ligotti's The Red Tower suggests that consciousness itself is an industrial byproduct. In House of Leaves, Danielewski creates a house larger on the inside than the outside, a recursive, door-filled space that undoes all who map it. None of these works mention the silver key, and yet all enact its logic. The boundary object that reveals the contingency of perception, identity, and textual stability. In postmodern, Erzeugt fiction, the key persists as method, not metaphor. The key also finds a place in aesthetic and philosophical subcultures focused on liminality, hauntology, and non-human agency. Within the hauntological movement, inspired by Derrida and propagated by artists like The Caretaker or Burial, the key functions symbolically as an emblem of access to lost futures, timelines that might have been. Its shimmer evokes nostalgia, not for something remembered, but for something once imagined and since erased. Similarly, in digital surrealism and hyperstition, a term coined by the CCRU, Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, the key has become a glyph of conceptual intrusion, a fictional construct that writes itself into reality through belief, repetition, and symbolic contagion. In this model, the silver key is not Lovecraft's creation, It is a virus that used Lovecraft to enter the cultural bloodstream. And yet, despite these appropriations, academic, ritual, artistic, the key retains its resistance to closure. No matter how often it is theorized, enacted, or reframed, it maintains a core opacity, a refusal to stabilize. This is perhaps why it endures. It does not offer clarity. It invites recursion. Each interpretation becomes another layer, another reflection of the key's original function, not to unlock content, but to collapse the illusion that content was ever the goal. In this sense, the key is not a relic of literary horror. It is a feedback loop, a myth that rewrites itself each time it is thought. It persists because it cannot be consumed. It cannot be solved. It can only be circulated. As we enter our final section, we must return to the philosophical and psychological terrain from which we began. What does it mean that a symbol like the silver key continues to resonate, not just in texts, but in dreams, subcultures, theories, and rituals? What does it say about the human psyche that we keep reaching for this object, even knowing it may erase us? In the final section, we will confront keys' enduring psychological and philosophical implications, not to close the door, but to admit that it may never have been openable in the first place. The silver key endures not because it is an object of power, but because it is an object of unresolvable yearning. Across fiction, myth, subculture, and scholarship, it recurs as a symbol of dangerous possibility, a gateway not to knowledge, but to a place where knowledge cannot hold. That it continues to resonate suggests something uncomfortable, that the modern psyche, disenchanted and rational, still craves symbols capable of undoing the self. We must consider, here at the threshold of our investigation's end, that the silver key is not merely a literary metaphor. It is a philosophical mirror. It reflects back the truth that beneath the scaffolding of identity, rationality, and perception lies a void that is neither evil nor redemptive, only indifferent. And the great horror may be that this void is not external to us. It is structural to consciousness itself. Psychologically, the key dramatizes the tension between two fundamental human drives, the will to understand and the will to remain intact. To seek the key is to risk that these drives are mutually exclusive. Carter's journey is exemplary in this regard, not because he learns too much, but because he glimpses that the self who learns is not unified, and perhaps never was. In modern psychological terms, we might describe the key as a trigger for ego dissolution, a state explored in both trauma studies and psychedelic research. In such states, individuals report the fracturing of the I, not into chaos, but into multiplicity or emptiness. The self is experienced not as a stable entity, but as a flickering pattern. Carter's encounter with the supreme archetype and his subsequent identity as Kauba parallels this precisely. It is not madness in the romantic sense. It is a psychological transition without a return point. This places the key in profound conversation with post-human philosophy, where the integrity of the subject is no longer assumed. Thinkers like Catherine Hales, Catherine Hales, and Rosie Braidotti have argued that the liberal humanist self, autonomous, rational, coherent, is a historical artifact, not a universal constant. The silver key enacts this critique narratively. It offers a portal not to divinity or destiny, but to post-human disintegration. In this reading, Carter's fate is not tragic. It is exemplary. He becomes a node in a wider pattern, a vessel for a consciousness that spans dimensions. Identity becomes distributed, recursive, and unknowable. The key does not unlock truth. It unlocks the illusion that truth requires a stable knower. And this, in a world increasingly defined by fragmentation of data, of identity, of global systems, makes the key a disturbingly relevant metaphor. We must pause here to acknowledge a deeper implication. The silver key is not a warning against curiosity. It is a test of readiness. It does not punish those who seek. It simply reveals that some doors, once opened, reconfigure the one who turns the handle. Lovecraft's cosmicism has often been misunderstood as nihilistic, but it is more accurately described as anti-anthropocentric. The universe does not hate us. It does not know us. And yet, we act. We interpret. We build meaning atop meaning, desperately avoiding the suspicion that meaning is always provisional. The silver key is the mythic object that interrupts this project. It whispers that to ask, "What does it all mean?" may be the wrong question. The real question may be, who is asking, and why does that voice assume it is singular? This insight returns us to the concept of the threshold, which has haunted the key symbolism from the beginning. In religious rituals, initiatory myths, and rites of passage, thresholds are moments of disjunction, where identity is suspended, categories blur, and transformation becomes possible. The silver key is threshold object par excellence, but its liminality never resolves. There is no return, no reconstitution. It initiates a permanent liminal state, what anthropologist Victor Turner might call communitas with the inhuman. It does not elevate the seeker, it evacuates them. This is not horror in the conventional sense. It is a philosophical dread, the realization that the self is not a soul, but a process. And processes can be interrupted, overwritten, or rendered obsolete. In this sense, the silver key anticipates our contemporary moment, a world saturated by simulations, AI-generated texts, decentralized selves, and recursive information loops. We live in a time when our memories are stored in clouds, our faces replicated by algorithms, and our choices shaped by predictive models. The idea that we might be one version among many, that our identity might be a temporary configuration within larger patterns, no longer feels like science fiction. It feels like Tuesday. The key, then, is not Lovecraft's relic. It is our mirror. Its logic now governs our media, our dreams, our cognitive dissonance. We carry it not in our pockets, but in our neurology. It is the icon of the unthinkable that already thinks through us. And so, we arrive, not at a conclusion, but at an unclosed door. The silver key has taken us through history, fiction, psychology, philosophy, and culture. It has shown us symbols that refuse meaning, knowledge that erases the knower, and doors that do not open outward but fold back into the mind itself. What remains is not understanding, but impression. A lingering shimmer, a dream of having once glimpsed something too vast to contain, too intimate to forget. Perhaps the key was never meant to be used. Perhaps it was meant to be remembered, as something almost known, briefly held, then lost. The key persists not because it explains, but because it defies explanation. It is not the final answer. It is the last question. And once asked, it cannot be unasked.